Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Afrasiab Khattak, a former senator of the Pakistan National Assembly from the Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa province. Mr. Khattak is with the Awami National Party of Bacha Khan or Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, a leader that we in India know very well and respect hugely. Mr. Khattak is not just a politician, but an intellectual, a Pashtun. And what that means is that he is very closely connected to people on both sides of the Durand line, in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan. And as Afghanistan undergoes a huge upheaval, there is no one better than Mr. Khattak to explain to us what is happening in his part of the world. Sir, welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you. So nice of you for your kind words.
So you are in Islamabad, but you keep in close touch with what's happening in Afghanistan. Of course, you're from the Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa. Tell me, in your view, what's happening? What's the latest situation in Afghanistan, and how do you personally look at it?
Well, it is a very saddening situation in the sense that in the last 100 years, it is for the third time that state system in Afghanistan is dismantled by foreign intervention and internal intrigues and insurgency, foreign-supported insurgency. And at the moment, 35 million people of Afghanistan are totally without state protection in this day and age. Afghan intelligentsia is living under fear. Thousands of them want to leave their country. Kabul airport is jam-packed from the last 1 week. And people are also heading towards exit points, land exit points into different countries neighboring Afghanistan.
But Mr. Khattak, you know a lot of Afghans, both Pashtuns as well as people from other ethnic groups. What is your personal experience? Are people getting in touch with you? Are they saying that they want to leave, they want to get out of Afghanistan? Or do you think that the Taliban, which has said that it will protect human rights and that nobody needs to be afraid, do you believe them?
People do not believe them. And I think there are valid reasons for that. When they entered Kandahar, for example, in Spin Buldak and areas close to Kandahar, even in Kandahar city, they went for summary executions of their opponents. They had lists. They went into homes. There were abductions. There were tortures. In Malistan, Ghazni, there were a massacre in Hazara community. So people have reasons to be scared. Moreover, Taliban have not declared any system. I mean, they just went with their guns. They don't have, for example, declared any state system vision for ruling Afghanistan, etc. So people have reason. People have bitter experience in the past. They remember that.
But said, the Taliban is saying that they're sending messages to various countries. They're saying that they're turning over a new leaf. So, for example, Zabihullah Mujahid, the spokesperson in his now famous press conference, said that women will be allowed to work according to the Sharia. What do you think that means?
I mean, they lack humility. They haven't gone for any self-criticism or any change in their attitude, their brutal rule in the past. They're inviting terrorist groups into Afghanistan, which turned Afghanistan into an international battleground.
Like which kind of terrorist groups?
Oh, there were, known terrorists like Al-Qaeda, like Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, like Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement, like TTP. So many organizations were there and they're still there. They're embedded with Afghanistan. The organizations that I named are part and parcel of Taliban fighting in Afghanistan for the last so many years.
But this question on the Sharia, which is interesting to me and I think especially to women inside Afghanistan, do you think that this statement by Zabihullah Mujahid, when he says that women will be allowed to work, they will be equal citizens of society, but according to the Sharia, what do you think that means?
You see, Afghanistan already had an Islamic system. Islamic Republic of Afghanistan didn't have any law which was violative of Islam. Keeping it very vague, they say according to Sharia, but what they don't say, and which is the reality, is the fact that it will be their interpretation of Islam which will be called Sharia, not, for example, independent scholars. So it's even in Pakistan we have this problem at times. People say that they understand Sharia like this, and that is the final word, absolute word, literalism at times. So that is really a very dangerous situation because, as I said, in Afghanistan, there was no controversy over accepting Islamic principles as general rules or principles, but Taliban have their own interpretation.
And you think it is a much more brutal and a much more violent interpretation?
It is. It is. You see, most of these Taliban have been studying Sharia in Pakistani religious seminaries. There are 36,000 religious seminaries in Pakistan. And many of them, most of them have been born in Pakistan. And they have attended religious seminaries in Pakistan. And for many, probably some of the fighters went for the first time in Afghanistan when they entered for this fighting. So they really lack knowledge of Afghan history, of even Afghan culture. You see, they have been brought up here in refugee camps. For example, they wouldn't know about Afghan poetry in Pashto or Persian. They wouldn't know enough about Ahmad Shah Abdali or other Afghan rulers of the past, or who founded Afghanistan state, or let me say King Zahir Shah, Muhammad Dawood Khan, or other Afghan leaders. They wouldn't know much because they haven't been taught. They have been brainwashed as soldiers who are there to implement Sharia, which is interpreted by their teachers in religious seminaries.
So what would these seminaries have taught them, and who controls these seminaries?
These seminaries were actually founded for Afghan war in 1980s, what is called Afghan jihad. It was American money, dollars, and petrodollars invested in these religious seminaries. You see, we had religious seminaries in the past, but those were just teaching religion. These new seminaries, which were founded in 1980s, actually have Middle Eastern extremist ideologies like Wahhabism, Salafism, Takfirism. So these boys were brainwashed in these seminaries, which were created for Afghan war in 1980s with Western money and Gulf money, Arab money.
But who controls them today?
It is mostly religious political parties, but these organizations have links with security establishment of Pakistan, and they have been part of the fightings in this region, particularly in Afghanistan.
So are you saying that the Pakistani security establishment, meaning the army and the ISI, they would have links or close links with the Taliban?
Most definitely, because Taliban were supported in 1990s very openly. They had offices in all big cities. Like I was in Peshawar, and there was a very big office in Quetta, in Karachi, and other cities. So this can't happen without patronage, state patronage, and they have been fighting. An insurgency in Afghanistan continuing for more than 20 years couldn't have survived without support from a neighboring country. And Pakistan is definitely host to them. And the emirate, the so-called Islamic emirate, was always based in Pakistan. This Quetta Shura is an open secret.
So why would the Pakistani military establishment want to control the Taliban? What does it bring to them?
Well, I have been a critic of this policy because I think it is harming Pakistan. It has harmed Pakistan also. You see, it was under General Ziaul Haq in 1980s that the theory of strategic depth in Afghanistan was conceived. It aims at turning Afghanistan into an appendage to Pakistan, where it becomes like a protectorate, a Pakistani protectorate, like it was in 19th century protectorate of British Empire. This is a very bad policy. I mean, a policy that really harms both the countries. It brought Kalashnikov culture into Pakistan, drugs, militancy, religious extremism. Pakistan became a hub of terrorism because of this policy. So this is really a very myopic policy.
So how do Pakistan and China have a very close relationship. So do you think that, and of course, and Russia as well, but do you think these countries will be in the ascendant today in a post-Taliban Afghanistan?
Well, all these countries which are standing behind Taliban do not see eye to eye on Afghanistan. They have different aims and objects and interests. I think China believes that Taliban, with the help of Pakistan, can be steered away from militancy, and they can be integrated into Belt and Road and this economic cooperation, regional economic cooperation. This is what they think and aspire for. But you see, US and UK think that it is not just Taliban, it's Talibanization. Mm-hmm. Some of these 36,000 religious seminaries of Pakistan would go to Afghanistan. And Afghanistan would become a hub of militancy, which like 1990s. Right. And of course, in that case, it will become a threat to China's stability and to Central Asia. Of course, Russia and Iran have a different game plan. The way they cooperated in Syria, in the Middle East, they think they can do the same thing in Afghanistan. And they can really support forces in Afghanistan, which will not be dependent on US or UK.
So, Mr. Khattak, you're from Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, which is predominantly Pashtun, and across the Durand Line, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, of course, a majority of the population in Afghanistan is also Pashtun. How do you think the Pashtun population is reacting to what's going on? Are they identifying with the Taliban, which is primarily Pashtun as well?
Well, Pashtun nationalists on both sides of the Durand Line are against Taliban because Taliban is basically an anti-Pashtun and anti-Afghan project. Their thrust is to deconstruct Pashtun Afghan identity. You see, when they entered Kabul in 1996, what were the first few things that they did? They, for example, changed the name of Radio Kabul. They turned into Voice of Sharia. Similarly, they banned Afghan national flag. They banned Afghan national anthem. They banned Nowruz, the New Year's Day, 5,000 years old festival. They banned Jirga, the most important Pashtun social institution. They murdered Dr. Najibullah, a great Afghan who really stood for peace and independent Afghanistan. They demolished Buddha. So Taliban was like a demolition squad let loose in Afghanistan. And it is the product of manipulation. I mean, our national identity was tampered with. You see, Pashtuns became Muslims after the arrival of Mahmud of Ghazna in this region. And broadly, majority of Afghans or Pashtuns were Muslims. So Afghan Muslims or Pashtun Muslim was the identity. In 1990s, a systematic effort was made to exaggerate the Islamic part of the identity, not for the love of Islam, but to weaken the Afghan part, the Pashtun part. So Taliban is basically for those who have some fears of this Pashtun question. For them, it's a solution of Pashtun question by deconstructing Pashtun identity. That's why Taliban also have killed around 1,000 political activists of Awami National Party, Badshah Khan followers, who were non-violent, who were not fighting them, but who were opposed to this extremism. They were killed, and they have killed more than 60,000 Pashtuns in Pakistan. So Pashtuns are concerned and they rise again because their violence really targets Pashtuns, particularly nationalist Pashtuns.
But sir, explain to me, when you say that 50,000 Pashtuns in Pakistan have been killed, these have been killed by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is the Pakistani Taliban, not the Afghan Taliban, I would imagine, right?
It is, this division, this bifurcation, distinction was very artificial, and it was, I think, a strategic need for those who are handling Taliban. Basically, it is one and the same movement.
So who is the one whose strategic need was this?
Pakistan security establishment. You see, TTP and Afghan Taliban were always one and the same. We have been saying this for let's say, from 2007 when TTP was founded. But you see, these people were denying. Now they have started saying that, yes, they are two sides of the same coin. Because when Taliban entered Kabul last week, they opened the gates of the prison. And it's not only just in Kabul, but in other cities also. So according to some estimates, a huge number of TTP were released from Afghan prisons. It is very interesting that Dr. Ashraf Ghani's government was always accused of siding with India and supporting TTP, but now we discovered that actually most of the TTP prisoners were held in Afghanistan, and their leaders also killed by Afghan military operations. But in any case, now it is very clear that Taliban are not really acting against TTP. They have released their prisoners and they have refused to act against TTP.
Explain to me, Mr. Khattak, why is it that the Pakistani security establishment wants to control the Afghan Taliban on the one hand, when you say that it seeks strategic depth within quotes in Afghanistan? On the other hand, you're saying that the distinction between the Afghan Taliban and the TTP is an artificial one. But if Pakistani Pashtuns are being killed, then surely the Pakistani security establishment doesn't want its own people to be killed.
Well, in 2007, TTP was created because at that time, when the NATO and US were going for a surge of the military presence in Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban needed some depth inside Pakistan so that they could have sanctuaries, safe sanctuaries, from which they could go back and fight against US and NATO forces. But you see, the problem was that had Afghan Taliban captured a district inside Pakistan, like Waziristan, like Khyber, like Bajor, these districts, any one of these districts, if it was captured by Afghan Taliban and the news would appear that Afghan Taliban have captured territory inside Pakistan, it would create a very embarrassing situation. It would be very difficult to explain. So TTP, a part of Taliban were declared TTP. So this area, these districts were handed over to TTP. And TTP sort of presented them to Afghan Taliban, who used them for the war. So it was a division of work, a strategic need of the fighting at that time. That the area was used by Afghan Taliban, but apparently it was controlled by Taliban who were Pakistani origin. So it was not Afghan occupation by individuals from Afghanistan, or groups from Afghanistan. So that was the main reason of creation of TTP, but they were always one and the same. And TTP has been fighting alongside Afghan Taliban in Afghanistan against US, NATO forces. Even now they have a strong presence on the Afghan side of the Durand line in Kunar, in Nangarhar, and other eastern provinces of Afghanistan.
So in a sense, the Pakistani military establishment is using the TTP and the Afghan Taliban as cannon fodder.
You see, yes, there is a very interesting book by a professor from Peshawar University. The book was published in 2005. The title was From Mahajir to Mujahid. From Mahajir is refugee, and Mujahid, the holy warrior. From Mujahid from Mahajir to Mujahid means how the refugees were turned into warriors. This book was published in 2005 by Dr. Fazal Rahim Marwat. And it explains the whole story of the 1980s. So that process has been working, and that's why Taliban had no dearth of fighters, because the factories operating in Pakistan producing Taliban fighters were there. They have been there for the last 40 years. And they're still around. You see, the main flaw of the Doha deal between US and Taliban was the lack of any mention of these sanctuaries. You see, US in a way undermined Afghan state and republic by excluding it from Doha deal, and it legitimized Taliban. It didn't mention sanctuaries or any cutoff date for closure of these sanctuaries.
So these sanctuaries continue to exist today?
Yes, they are existing even today as we are speaking. Yes, they have been there for all the time, although Pakistani governments have remained in denial. But I think it has been an open secret. This Quetta Shura was based in Kuchlak, and these Taliban leaders were, most of them were based here.
But how are you so sure, Mr. Khattak, that the sanctuaries are there even today, whether it's in Quetta or in Miranshah or in Peshawar?
Well, during last 2 months, Talibans have been taking out processions. When dead bodies of Pakistani fighters would come back to Pakistan, for example, in Chaman, they would cross into Pakistan. There would be hundreds of Talibans to receive them with Taliban flags, chanting slogans, going in procession to Quetta. In Peshawar, the same happened. Now how can they deny this? Because there was public demonstration by Taliban in these two provinces.
So even in Peshawar, which you know, a city that you know very well.
Yes, of course. But we always knew that Taliban were in Peshawar. Yes. Quetta was, of course, as I said, the center for the leadership, Quetta Shura.
So are you saying then that the Pakistani security establishment, if it's funding the TTP or strategizing with the TTP, those are Pakistani citizens. And if they're attacking Pakistani Pashtuns, then your Pakistanis are being killed, basically?
You see, this war in Afghanistan had many contradictions. That's why it has been very difficult for the world to understand. You see, even US bases were in Pakistan. The Shamsi base was in Balochistan, given to them by General Musharraf. American drones would fly from this base in Pakistan. They would go and kill Taliban fighters in Waziristan, for example. But Taliban would be there in Quetta, and US base was not far away for them. There have been double games by US, by Pakistan, by Iran, almost all these countries have been playing double games, unfortunately. We have been criticizing this policy because we thought, many Pashtuns thought that this was a very myopic policy. Pakistan and Afghanistan had the potential of having very close relations, good relations based on commonalities that both countries have: religion, culture, history, geography, economic interests. But unfortunately, our voices, our criticism was ignored. And the same policy that was started by General Ziaul Haq has continued up till this date.
So you said a few minutes ago that the Taliban, which continues to exist, that the Shuras, which continue to exist in Quetta or in Miranshah and in Peshawar, and one of the ways that you know this is because Pakistani fighters and the dead bodies of Pakistani fighters, when they're brought in, then protests are held or demonstrations are held. Now, are you saying then that Pakistani fighters are fighting alongside the Afghan Taliban?
Yes, of course. As I said, the Taliban are product of the seminaries in Pakistan. So Pakistani fighters also brainwashed in these seminaries also went along. But
was that in the 90s or even today?
No, not today. In the last 3 months, many photos have gone viral on social media of fighters, dead bodies coming into Pakistan, their funerals, held by religious political parties, and Afghan Taliban also attended funerals in Pakistan. So these are...
But these are bodies of Pakistani citizens, or are they bodies of Pakistani army men?
No, they are Pakistani citizens. As far as I know so far, the bodies that I have known of were Pakistani citizens, mostly people who were studying in religious seminaries alongside Afghans.
But you feel that the security establishment inside Pakistan is militarily helping the Afghan Taliban, supplying them with weapons, strategizing with them, giving them military advice?
Well, no sanctuaries could exist without permission and support of the state. So I can say that, yes, they enjoyed support of the state. I mean, I'm not privy to the details, but what I can say is that, yes, they operated from Pakistan.
Now, Ashraf Ghani is Pashtun, Hamid Karzai is Pashtun. You have large parts of both the Ashraf Ghani as well as the Hamid Karzai government who are Pashtun. But you still have the Taliban that was able to overthrow the Ashraf Ghani government. So in your view, what do you think of Ashraf Ghani as a Pashtun and as the former president of Afghanistan?
First of all, let me just first say that it is the third time in the last 100 years that Afghan state system has been overthrown or dismantled by foreign intervention and internal insurgency. Amanullah Khan's overthrow in 1929 was the first one in the 20th century. The second was when the government of Dr. Najibullah was overthrown in 1992 in a military coup. And after that, this Mujahideen and Taliban descended on Afghanistan and the state system was dismantled. It is the third time that it is happening. So this is really, every time that it has happened, it has damaged Afghanistan. It has really been bad for the region because it destabilizes the region. Sorry, what was your next other part of the question?
No, my question is that Ashraf Ghani is a Pashtun.
Yeah, okay.
What do you make of a man like that who abandoned his country, left with millions of dollars, was stuffing them into the aircraft? Some of it was, there was so much money that it was sort of flying all over the runway. And what do you make of a man like that who just betrayed his own people?
Well, his departure or what happened at that time, I would like to wait a little bit because in war, the first casualty is the truth. So we'll see. We have yet to have his version. I don't know. I really don't know. But I can say that the failure of Dr. Ashraf Ghani and other Afghan political leaders or military leaders, you see, was that they were not able to unite. The Republicans could not unite against Taliban. They couldn't unite on a minimum program to face Taliban and to negotiate with US with one voice. They did not. So there was a lot of disunity. And that disunity sort of created an opportunity for Taliban and others to overthrow the system. To me, that is the major failure of Republican part of non-Taliban Afghans. The political faces or personalities or groups that were produced by the democratic process in the last 2 decades. It was their major failure.
What do you make of the resistance being mounted by Amrullah Saleh in the Panjshir Valley?
It is too early to speak about sort of military resistance, etc. But I think Afghan people have already shown on 19th of August when people came out in different cities. And interestingly, they came out in eastern and southern cities, which are mostly Pashtun population. Kunar, Nangarhar, Khost, Kandahar, Kabul. People came out in favor of national flag. So you see, Afghanistan has changed. Although most of the middle class is trying to leave Afghanistan, But even then, I think the Afghan population in general has been exposed to democratic processes. Afghanistan is urbanized. To me, in 20th century, the major challenge for Afghanistan was its remaining outside the modernity. Kabul was the only city, the only urban center. The rest of Afghanistan was rural and tribal. In these last 40 years, first the Soviet intervention and after the American intervention, Afghanistan has transformed. There are cities. In some cases, these cities, this urbanization was faster than Pakistan. For example, Khost is a town not far away from Miranshah in North Waziristan. Now, Ashraf Ghani, in his last days, opened direct international flights from Khost to Gulf, where people go for work. And Khost's cricket ground is comparable with Lahore or Rawalpindi. So you see, Afghanistan has changed. And I like what Liz Doucet, the famous British journalist, said the other day. She said, yes, Taliban might have changed, but have they changed enough for Afghanistan or proportionate to changes in Afghanistan's socio-cultural life? So I think that is true. And there will be resistance to Taliban. You see, a whole new generation has been brought up. And I've been going to Kabul and other cities of Afghanistan during the last few years very frequently and have interacted with young people. I know they will resist. If Taliban do not adapt to the changes, socio-cultural changes, political changes in Afghan society, they will face resistance.
Yes, it's very interesting because you see already that in some of these cities in Ghazni, not just in Kabul, but in other cities, that you have people raising the Afghan flag. And even women are coming out in the streets, although they're wearing now full abaya in black, but they are coming out in the streets and protesting against the Taliban.
Yes, I remember it was, I think, in 2016, yes. I went to Kabul and we participated in a conference seminar about our famous poet, Ghani Khan. Abdul Ghani Khan was the eldest son of Badshah Khan. Ghani Khan was, by the way, elected in December 1945 as the sole member from our province to the All India Legislative Assembly. Ghani Khan, he's a poet, painter, philosopher. He got his education in Rabindranath Tagore's Shanti Niketan in Calcutta. So Ghani Khan's poetry is very popular among Pashto-speaking population. So there was a seminar about Ghani Khan. And when I looked around, I told a colleague of mine, I said, look, these are the mujahideen who were trained in Pakistan in religious seminaries. I mean, their trainers expected that they would forget being Afghans or Pashtuns, but they were wrong. So I still believe that this deconstruction of Afghan identity is not possible. It is the product of the last 3,000 years. It can't be just undone with a military victory or suppression or oppression or violence. I think it is going to stay. I think Afghans will resist, and I foresee a future for Afghanistan where Afghan young people will take their own destiny in their hands.
So let me ask you the last couple of questions. The Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is an indigenous Pashtun movement in Pakistan, we hear about it, we read about it almost on a daily basis, how young men and women have been undertaking long marches, completely non-violent. That in itself is quite staggering. But explain to me the importance of the PTM.
PTM is a indigenous grassroots movement, spontaneous and very authentic. It is the product of war and oppression, tyranny, which has been faced by people in the districts close to the dividend line. They were called FATA, federally administered tribal areas. Now they are merged in the province technically, but they still are not totally merged, not totally mainstreamed. So these young men and women and girls were brought up in internally displaced persons camps. You see, they had to spend long years in camps where they were racially profiled and discriminated against. So when they returned to their areas, they were shocked to see the disempowerment. You see, the area didn't have any fundamental rights. So this movement, I think, is against war, against tyranny. It's for the dignity of human life and for becoming equal citizens. So I think it has inspired young people across the Durand line in Afghanistan. And you can see on social media.
Are you saying across the Durand line? So both in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan?
Yes. You see, this FATA was sort of an additional buffer created by Britishers behind the buffer state of Afghanistan. It was meant to be a buffer between Pashtuns in Afghanistan and Pashtuns in the Indian subcontinent at that time when Britishers were ruling. You see, that's why Amanullah Khan's movement in 1920s did not reach Peshawar. And that's why Badshah Khan's movement did not penetrate into Afghanistan. So this was a sort of a dry wood, non-conductor of political currents. But it is not anymore dry. It is politicized. It is because of socio-economic changes, cultural changes, and also because of politicization of the population during these 40 years of war. This area was launching pad for the war in Afghanistan for the last 40 years. And people have realized that it was a fraud in the name of jihad. And actually, it was a war that really destroyed Pashtuns and Afghans on both sides of the Durand line.
So on the one hand, you have the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, the PTM, and on the other side, you have the Afghan Taliban and the TTP. Yes.
As I earlier said, Taliban is basically a project to deconstruct Pashtun Afghan identity. But PTM is a proof that it can't be achieved because they are in the area which was the hub of this whole fighting during the last 40 years. But the new generation has rejected all that narrative of General Ziaul Haq. So I believe that's why I see hope in the future.
Mr. Afrasiab Khattak, thank you so much for your time in these last few minutes. You have given us all not just a history lesson, but a political science lesson, one in contemporary realpolitik, not just the story of Afghanistan, but the story of Pakistan and the entire South Asian region. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate speaking to ThePrint.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. So nice of you.
Thank you, sir.
All the best.